a scholarly article for Hebrew Bible in Ancient Israel, Volume 6, Number 4, December 2017. A 17-page scholarly article titled Revealing Nakedness and Concealing Homosexual Intercourse, Legal and Lexical Evolution in Leviticus 18. The abstract reads, the list of forbidden unions in Leviticus 18 reflects comprehensive revision that obscures its original character. The motive for reworking this passage was to reverse the original text's implicit sanctioning of male same-sex intercourse. This conclusion finds support in additional biblical and ancient Near Eastern texts. So there's the abstract. So what you have is a straightforward, ultra-left, revisionist assertion that Leviticus 18 has undergone comprehensive revision and that its original teaching was the opposite of what it is now. Specifically, the original sanctioned male same-sex intercourse. And that the reworking has been to introduce the revision of that. So that's the, who knows, maybe someone from the Times was scanning through abstracts looking for possible article titles or article material, whatever it might be. And maybe that's how this took place. I don't know. But sadly, it is this kind of article that gets copied over and over again. It gets read in basic introduction to religion classes and rarely gets refuted within solid churches because you don't even see this stuff, or you dismiss it as being utterly irrelevant. And then we get hit with it and we don't have good responses. Okay, so that's why I wanted to take time to look at it. I sent it to Michael Brown because I was away. And he said, yep, I've had a number of people send it to me. And he wrote an article yesterday. His articles are word limited as to how long they can be, so it's not super in-depth. It really can't go into everything. But I did retweet his tweet where he announced that article, and you can go read that. So what do we have here? No text has had a greater influence on attitudes toward gay people than the biblical book of Leviticus, which prohibits sex between men. True and false. I would say that Romans 1 has been read by a much wider audience than Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 20. And I think the vast majority of Christians who've read Romans chapter 1 probably were not even aware of the specifics of Leviticus 18 and 20. It is interesting to me that this biblical scholar never once mentions, and this is a New York Times piece, maybe he does mention it in the scholarly article, I don't know. It's $25. I just didn't want to spend the money. But I sort of doubt that he did mention it, to be perfectly honest with you. That Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 20 have two different audiences. One is talking about the abominable, the toeva actions of the people of the land that's going to result in land spitting them out. Leviticus 20 is specifically for the people of God. That's why there's a difference between the two prohibitions. And that's why one has a legal penalty and the other does not. So again, by the way, I haven't mentioned this in a while, but I did a 35 sermon series on the Holiness Code, tackled, as far as I could tell, every tough, and I mean really tough, biblical text on difficult laws. And that's available at sermonaudio.com at the PRBC website. Drop down the sermons thing and you'll find the Leviticus Code, or the Holiness Code series there. So I obviously spent a great deal of time in Leviticus 18, 19, and 20 right at the beginning. Before Leviticus was composed, outright prohibitions against homosexual sex, whether between men or women, were practically unheard of in the ancient world. That sounds really neat until you think about what that means. There's almost no literature before Leviticus would have been composed. Now, of course, he's going to use a very late date for Leviticus. I put Leviticus at 1400 years before Christ. He's not going to do that. But even at that, you're talking, all that sentence says is, it was a pagan world, and Israel and monotheism and a meaningful ethical moral system like that was pretty hard to come by. Yes, that's a given. But that has little to do with the topic at hand. Chapter 18 of Leviticus contains a list of forbidden incestuous acts, followed by prohibitions against sex with a menstruating woman, bestiality, and various other sexual acts. In verse 22, we find its famous injunction, you shall not lie with a man as with a woman. It is an abomination. Leviticus 20:13 repeats this law, along with a punishment for those who violate it. They shall be put to death. Their blood is upon them. Again, Dr. Dershowitz, for some reason, probably because he doesn't, these types of left-wing Old Testament interpreters don't look to see coherence and consistency. They look only for division. And so it would not be normative for them to say, well, what you have in Leviticus 18 is a discussion of the sins of the nations around Israel that results in their being expelled from the land. And then in Leviticus 20, you're getting into the specific legal code for the people themselves. And so there's a difference between the two. That's why there's a punishment attached to the second one, et cetera, et cetera. They're not generally going to do that. It doesn't even look like he's recognized that particular aspect of these things. Like many ancient texts, Leviticus was created gradually over a long period and includes the words of more than one writer. Well, that is a very, very popular theory. It's stated as a fact rather than as a theory. What should be stated is one theory regarding the origin of the book of Leviticus is that it was created gradually over a long period and includes the words of more than one writer. It's just simply dismissed the possibility that this was actually the writings of a man named Moses. I'm sure Dr. Dershowitz does not believe there was a man named Moses at all. But it's important to recognize that the vast majority of writing about the Old Testament today comes from people who believe that it is an incoherent, recension-rich, edited, badly, poorly edited text that is the result of literally generations and centuries of development, and that there is no way to come up with any kind of meaningful, coherent understanding of the text. That's their presupposition. That's their starting point. They rarely defend it. You need to understand, if you go to the vast majority of seminaries, liberal seminaries, unbelieving seminaries, you're going to be given this as the enlightened, factual understanding of the origination of the Old Testament, especially the Torah. There will be no discussion of any counter views. There will be no discussion of the possibility of the text being in any way consistent with itself. There might be a brief discussion. People in the past actually used to believe there was one guy named Moses wrote all this stuff, but we know that's ridiculous today, and so we don't even bother to go there. And that'll be it. If you go to a conservative seminary, you will be taught all about what these people believe. It will be rejected, it'll be interacted with, but you will, and sometimes it felt like waste your time, but it's not necessarily a waste of time. You will, the conservative seminaries, listen to what the other side says, interact with it, and refute it. Liberals don't even give it the time of day. If you want proof of this, look at almost every single debate I've ever had with a liberal. Most of them had not even Googled my name, let alone read anything that I ever wrote. Because from their perspective, we have nothing meaningful to say at all. And they're just reflecting their own upbringing. They're reflecting their own experience. That's how they were trained. And so this is what you're going to encounter. It's going to be, it's the old JEDP theory, Yahwist, Elohist, Deuteronomist, priestly sources, and it's exceptionally subjective. But that's the wonderful thing, is that you can come up with all sorts of theories and you can get published in all sorts of journals, because basically the Old Testament text is theological Plato. Do with it what you will. And here's the important part. He never refers to a single textual source because he has none. He can theorize, well, Leviticus originally said this. Do you have any evidence of that? I mean, like, a manuscript, a citation, quotation, maybe some ostraka from an archaeological dig in Israel, just anything. I was going to bring it up and I got distracted. I'm sorry. But remember just 9 months ago when they used that really cool new computer technology using X-rays to unroll the Leviticus scroll that can't be unrolled because it would fall apart into 1,000 pieces? Remember, they scanned it and they could actually literally unroll it and read it and the whole 9 yards. What did it say? Exactly what the Masoretic text said 900 years later. So where are these variant Levitici, copies of Leviticus, promoting same-sex union between men? Where's the quotations? Where's the inscriptions on a stone someplace that can be traced back to ancient Israel and quoting from Moses saying it's great to do that? There isn't anything such thing. Well, it's just all been destroyed. Well, the Roman Empire tried to destroy the New Testament, and we have got a pretty substantial amount of material that somehow survived even their efforts. And they were better at it than anybody in the earlier period would have been. Had a whole lot more material available to them. No, just realize it is pure speculation without the slightest bit of historical material to go on. So he goes on to say, many scholars believe that the section in which Leviticus 18 appears was added by a comparatively late editor. By the way, was Leviticus 18 in the scroll that was unrolled electronically? Of course it was, word for word. Perhaps one who worked more than a century after the oldest material in the book was composed. An earlier edition of Leviticus, then, may have been silent on the matter of sex between men. Then again, it may have spoken about Vulcans and may have had an entire speech from Spock in it. You have just as much evidence of that. It's really easy to come up with stuff like this. That's why I've objected when you do the same type of thing to the text of the Quran, even though the Quran's much later, and hence should have more information to it. I still just have this aversion to this kind of speculative, hey, maybe there's a version that said this and a version that said that. And hey, if you don't have evidence of it, now at least I could point to Sa'ana, and it has lots of variations in it, but that's another issue. We won't go there right now. But I think a stronger claim is warranted, as they argue in an article published in the latest issue of the journal Hebrew Bible in Ancient Israel, the one I read the abstract from. There is good evidence that an earlier version of the laws in Leviticus 18, now notice it says there's good evidence. The evidence is purely based upon speculative form criticism. There is no material evidence whatsoever. None. Most people reading the New York Times are going to assume that evidence means something more than what he actually means. Good evidence that an earlier version of the laws in Leviticus 18 permitted sex between men In addition to having the prohibition against same-sex relations added to it, the earlier text, I believe, was revised in an attempt to obscure any implication that same-sex relations had once been permissible. Now, what would you have to now prove? That there was some kind of major revolutionary change in the nature of Israelitish religion at this very point in time that allowed, without any evidence surviving history, to prompt a complete revision of the text without anything surviving that indicated otherwise. Is there any evidence of that? Of course not. Pure speculation. That's why publishing in the area of form criticism. You might say, well, aren't you working in doctoral work in textual criticism? Isn't that the same thing? No, it is not. Textual criticism is not form criticism. Textual criticism, you have to deal with actual manuscripts and actual readings. You have to deal with something that you can actually place in history at a point in time. Form criticism, you can go, it's possible that maybe originally, before the revision, it said this. Well, that's nice. That's why coming up on 40 years ago, the Lord dragged me off to, well, it's only been 32 or something like that, but dragged me off to, just kept me so poor that because this ministry had already started, the only place I could go to get graduate theological training was Fuller Theological Seminary. And at the time, I wondered why. Now I know why. I've told you the story of Gerhard von Rod's commentary on Deuteronomy. I got a 98 on that book review. And it was completely negative. But the point is, I know how these guys work. And here they are. They're still doing the same thing. Now they're in the New York Times someplace. I'm sorry? Oh, yeah, I would never survive it today. No. He says, the chapter's original character, however, can be uncovered with a little detective work. Actually, it's with a little fantasy writing. That's what it is. This is fantasy writing. Just because somebody has letters after their name doesn't mean that they are not actually a frustrated fantasy writer. The core of Leviticus 18 is the list of incest laws. Well, that's important, but I wouldn't identify it as the core. But again, from his perspective, placing it in the context, flow of thought, can't do it. Each of which includes the memorable phrase, uncover nakedness. This is typically understood as a euphemism for sexual intercourse. So you shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's sister. It means something like, do not have sex with your father's sister. Yeah, basically, it may not require the entire act, but normatively would have. So, yeah, in that sense, I'll take that as a general given. Most of the incest laws are presented in a straightforward manner, but two are not. The first exception is the nakedness of your father and the nakedness of your mother you shall not uncover. She is your mother. You shall not uncover her nakedness. At first, this verse appears to outlaw sex between a man and either of his parents. However, the italicized explanation or gloss, notice he's assuming this is a later addition, suggests that the law actually addresses only one parent, the mother. It is difficult to reconcile the two parts of the sentence. No, it is not. No, it is not. It is very common, not only in the Pentateuch, but elsewhere in Scripture, for Hebrew to emphasize an aspect of a commandment or a statement by a repetitive, not just Hebrew parallelism, but by a repeated emphasis upon one aspect of it. Don't tell me that that is not a standard characteristic of Hebrew writing. It is. End of his theory. That's the problem. Because, see, form criticism, you always have to come up with a hook, something unique, something new. It may be absurd. It may be so stupid that no one ever thought of it before, but it'll allow you to get published. And once you get published, you put it on your Vita, and now it helps you. It's how Western scholarship works. It's how Western scholarship works. It is difficult to reconcile the two parts of the sentence. No, it is not. She is your mother, you shall not uncover her nakedness is simply an emphasis upon the intimate relationship between mother and offspring that is represented elsewhere in the text of Leviticus and other Old Testament books. It's simple repetition for emphasis. And yet, you turn it into, oh, wow, here's evidence of tampering. You can do that with anything. Any theory you want to come up with. That's how you do it, right there. I realize I just ruined a large portion of Old Testament stuff that's being published today, but that's the way to do it. The same thing happens again a few verses later. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's brother. Simple enough, right? The following gloss, however, may give you whiplash. You shall not approach his wife. She is your aunt. By the time we finished reading the gloss, a prohibition against intercourse between a man and his paternal uncle is transformed into a law about sex between a man and that uncle's wife. No, it has just expanded it. It is including other aspects to make sure that the prohibition is clearly understood. You see, once you can start atomizing a text and start, I think this came from over here and this came from there and came over there, there's nothing you can't do with the text. You can make any text prove anything. You can make any text prove absolutely anything. As long as you're willing to just pull it apart. Put it back together again, whatever form you want. That's easy to do. And yet that's what a lot of scholarship today is. Each verse in Leviticus 18 series of incest laws contains a similar gloss, but the others are merely emphatic. So he even knows the emphatic element, driving home the point, as are those. For example, you should not uncover the nakedness of your daughter-in-law. She is your son's wife. You should not uncover her nakedness. Exact parallel. Only in these two cases, the father and mother and the father's brother, do the glosses alter our understanding of what is prohibited. Alter as in expand. A law prohibiting sex with one's father fades away. No, it doesn't. And a law, see, you see how the atomizing of the text allows you to say this? Because if you were to stand back and say, well, wait a minute, is this author clear in prohibiting something? Given other things he says, the answer is yes. These guys can't do that because they don't think there is an author. And so you can just, again, it becomes Play-Doh in your hands. You can do whatever you want with it. A law prohibiting sex with one's father fades away, and a law against sex with one's uncle is reinterpreted as a ban on sex with one's aunt. It's not reinterpreted. It is added to. It is expanded. It doesn't change. You're not supposed to have sex with your uncle either, or with your father. What we have here is strong evidence of editorial intervention. Sorry. You're not supposed to laugh at that, but folks, this is the best that the unbelievers have. And, I've said many times, walking down the commentary aisle in the Christian bookstore is one of the most dangerous places you can go. Why? Because especially when it comes to Old Testament stuff, if it was published in the past 100 years, it's going to be filled with this kind of garbage. This kind of garbage. Unsubstantiated. Everybody else is doing it, so I'm going to do it too. Subjective garbage. Taken as a given. Taken as a given. It is worth noting that these new glosses render the idiom uncover nakedness incoherent. The phrase can no longer denote sex if uncovering the nakedness of one's father is an act that involves one's mother, as the gloss implies. It sound like he's overcomplicating things here and missing the obvious? Yeah, he really, really is. But more strikingly, the two exceptional verses are the only ones that address incest between men. All the others involve women. Once the new glosses were added to the text, for which I offer absolutely no evidence whatsoever, the prohibitions of Leviticus against incest no longer outlaw any same-sex couplings. Only heterosexual pairs were forbidden. If a later editor of Leviticus opposed homosexual intercourse, you might wonder, wouldn't it have made more sense for him, and it was probably a him, to leave the original bans on homosexual incest intact? No, the key to understanding this editorial decision is the concept of the exception proves the rule. According to this principle, the presence of an exception indicates the existence of a broader rule. For example, a sign declaring an office to be closed on Sundays suggests that the office is open on all of the days of the week. Now, apply this principle to Leviticus 18. A law declaring that homosexual incest is prohibited could reasonably be taken to indicate that non-incestuous homosexual intercourse is permitted. So now once you've atomized it, then you don't have to worry about, well, but verse 20 says, oh, no, that's later on. But over in chapter 20, oh, no, different time. You see, there can be no consistent message to any text given the presuppositions that are brought to it by the form critics. All you've got to do to come up with your publishable thesis is to choose, okay, of all these sentences, I'm going to take out this phrase and that phrase and that phrase and these sentences and that sentence, and I'm going to say this is the original. And now when I put them all back together again, I can say, this is what happened. Look at my brilliant insight. And now I'll get published in the New York Times. Am I missing something? I just looked into channel.
No, I was simply saying that you got this up too high. You made the comment about him missing something. He is, my point was he isn't missing anything. He's drawing these conclusions on purpose because it's where he wants him to go.
Oh yeah, that's what form criticism is all about. That's what form criticism is all about. It's not a serious handling of the text. It is the utilization of the text in such a fashion as to allow you to come up with whatever you want to come up with. Now, what's going to happen then is what you're going to hear. I guarantee you, in a short period of time, that there's going to be some Christian father somewhere who is going to have their child go to the local community college and run into one of those guys who isn't even as bright as Dershowitz here, but read Dershowitz's article and went, oh, there it is. And some poor Christian child is going to say, but the Bible says, and here it comes. Don't you realize scholars have recognized that Leviticus 18 has been edited and all that stuff was put in later, and originally it said same-sex relationships were good? You got to get out of the Bible and start seeing real scholarship. It's going to happen. It's not going to happen just once. It's going to happen over and over and over again. Now, we've got a choice to make. We can either send our children into Caesar's schools unarmed, or you might want to send them into a Christian school. That might be a really good Christian school. There aren't that many of them left, but there are a few out there. Or if they're going to go to that university, and maybe they're studying maybe they're studying accounting, economics, and they have to take a class, and they choose this one, and they run into this, okay? Maybe this isn't their major or something like that. Are you going to send them in without armor, without weapons, without training, without defense? Or are we going to stop entertaining our children and start training our children?